is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 593. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you've been drafting it up?
Oh, yeah. I have done a lot of drafts, and I guess one way to put it in perspective, I know we're going to talk about this card later, is I've had 4 different decks with Cody in it, the book rare. So, yeah, you could say I've done a few drafts.
Yeah, because I think I've been doing a decent amount, but I've only had one Cody in any of my draft piles, and I didn't even end up playing it. So there you go. Mainly because I still don't really know what it does, so that's probably a problem. Maybe you can help me with that today, because there has been some chatter on Twitter about it being maybe a little better than it looked at first glance. Before we get into our Strixhaven First Impressions show here, let's talk about our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com, with their sweet new logo. You can head over to Channel Fireball for really anything you need Magic related. They've always got something going on over at CFB. Some type of promotion or cool new thing coming out, depending on what it is that you're into. And of course, content, right? This show is not the only content that you can get from Channel Fireball. They sponsor us, but there's content directly on the front page with articles from some of your favorite players and personalities from around the Magic scene. And then on top of that, you can even get CFB Pro, which is the premium content side of things. So that's where you get the super deep dives onto constructed decks, or even sometimes limited content that goes extra deep. And you can find that stuff now from some of the best writers in the game. William Huey Jensen, Riley Knight also happens to write there, Martin Yuza, Luis Scott-Vargas, Reed Duke, Andrea Mengucci. These are really some of the best players, and a bunch also of up-and-coming writers as well that you can find over at Channel Fireball. And while you're there, you can pick up Strixhaven. So, yeah, it's time for that now. And the lesson starts soon, as it says on the website, and you can head over and pick up Strixhaven. And you can do what I did on the weekend. We use Spell Table, which is primarily a commander-focused site, but you can use it for one-on-one as well. And I played against people over Spell Table for the Strixhaven pre-release party. It was really fun, and I got that feeling of holding actual Magic cards in my hand and getting to talk to people that are real human beings and using their voice and everything. So that was really cool. And if you want to try that, you could even just play with your friends or whatever over that and get those cards in your hand. You can pick up those boxes, singles, anything else you need over at Channel Fireball. Additionally, if you do buy something, if you would use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it helps us out and we do appreciate it. You can also support us directly through the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. Fully flexible, fully transparent way to support the content creators that you love. And if we happen to be one of them, we'd certainly appreciate it if you'd support us over on Patreon. You get a bunch of cool little perks too, including you get to ask questions on the Patreon feed for the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Harry, who says, if your opening hand has 2 lands, a 2-drop, and any land off the top can cast the rest of your spells, do you keep it? On the play, you have a 90.4% chance of drawing a 3rd land by turn 4, this says. Is 9.6% odds of missing your 3rd land and 4th land drop, and 5.7 to miss your 5th too risky? How do you hit your win rate compared to your first mulligan? And the short answer is it too risky? No, not at all. In most gaming scenarios, you are going to be hard pressed to find a 90% scenario for almost anything. That is as good as it gets with unknown information. So definitely not.
I'd go so far as to say I would never mulligan a hand that had 2 lands, a 2-drop, and the rest being 3 drops.
Right. I would even keep it on the play, by the way, but where your percent chance goes into the 80s. But still, this is 90% by turn 4. We're really talking about turn 3 for that kind of inflection point. But still, Harry, these, if you're looking at a 90% situation, that's about as risk-free as you can get. So you take it, you snap it off. And, these are part of the reasons the mid 80s up into the high and into the low 90s percents for turn 3 versus turn 4. That's as good as you're going to get. And if your hand can function on that's ends up being a lot of the times where when people send us messages on Twitter and say, should I keep this? I often say yes. It's just way more often than I'm keeping these type of hands.
I've kept worse.
I've kept worse. Good way to put it.
Put it that way.
Yeah. So let's get into the show here, Louis. So we are here for our first impressions of Strixhaven, and it definitely has lent some big impressions early on if you're on social media.
First things first, I'm kind of thinking that we should change the name of the show. Because
it's been out for a week and a half or whatever.
The way that Limited works these days, like everything is just such an accelerated time frame. I think it's a combination of arena, of people not having places to go and things to do, and just we get access to the set much earlier than we used to in the lifespan. So yes, this is the first show after we finished our set reviews, but it just feels like we've even moved past first impressions at this point, doesn't it? Like it.
Yeah. It does.
This is the first time the format.
Yeah, this is the first
deep into it.
Right. Yeah, because this is the first time that the audience is getting to hear our take, but this is not our first impression. I have moved past my very initial take for sure. So maybe we'll come up. I mean, maybe it's worth it just to keep it because people get it, and we've used that term for a while. So it's kind of like, oh, it's that show. It is not accurate anymore, though. You're right. Interesting to note that. Yeah, the accelerated time frame and these cursed 17 lands people getting tilted at 17 lands data now is pretty funny, Luis.
Well, I think that, this is it's a topic for another show, but obviously like that data can definitely be used for both good and ill. And in some cases, I've seen it stifle discussion when people are like, well, so-and-so has this win rate. In any case, let's move on to the first thing that Marshall, you're now a professional streamer, as am I. What is the question we get asked starting from the literal first pack you've opened of Strixhaven? Well, what's the best guild?
Yeah, what guild should I be in? And especially for anybody that was getting the paper pre-release packs, like for the thing that I did, that Strixhaven release party, it's which guild should I get? Which guild should I get?
Well, college, I guess, yeah. But yeah,
college, yeah.
That was my fault. I put guild rankings on the notes, but yes, which college is the best? And it's funny because, like, in some ways that like doesn't matter in the sense that you should try to figure out in each draft which one you're supposed to be in, but in some ways it does, and especially when there's dramatic differences between them. My rankings, and let me know if you disagree that after watching your stream, I don't think you're going to be too far off either. Is Quandrix and Prismari as the top two, then Witherbloom, then another gap between Witherbloom and then Lorehold. And then I know some people have Lorehold last, some people have Silverquill last. This is where the fact that we're a little earlier in the format does you do see it, because I just haven't really drafted much Silverquill, and it's not that I haven't wanted to, it hasn't really felt right to.
Yeah, for me, I have Lorehold and Witherbloom grouped, and then Silverquill at the bottom. I have not been particularly impressed by Witherbloom or Lorehold. I feel like I'm still kind of figuring out what they're really trying to do. Like, is there like a hardcore synergy version of these decks, with Witherbloom where you're sacrificing to get, creatures to get 5/4s on turn 3 or turn 2 or whatever. And like, that's the name of the game, some type of recursion thing, because those have felt very spotty to me. Like, occasionally something cool happens, but it's not consistent enough. And with Lorehold, I can't figure out where it's trying to be. It definitely has some powerful stuff going on, but it like feels sort of torn between semi-aggressive creatures and then quite late game style cards, right? Like cards that really don't even turn on until late into the game. And there's this whole, like, when things leave your graveyard, am I supposed to be focusing on that? And then Silverquill just feels lost to me. Normally you'd think that the black-white college, with the type of removal that it has access to, would be kind of a no-brainer. It's like, get a bunch of really good removal and then fill it in with whatever they happen to throw at us. It doesn't seem to work. All of the decks that we mentioned, Quandrix, Prismari, Witherbloom, and Lorehold, can all grind, right? Like if you're trying to go 1-for-1 removal against them, they all have builds that don't care about that. So I think that's why Silverquill's suffering here. It doesn't seem as synergistic either.
So let's talk about the each guild a little bit, or each college a little bit, as to what they're doing. Quandrix has seemed to play basically one way, which is it's the ramp school. Like,
let's go big.
Quandrix has card draw. It has ramp spells. It has big payoffs. It has, it utilizes learn quite well. And there's not really an aggro Quandrix deck that's going to come up too often. I'm not saying it's not possible, because I can construct a set of cards in blue and green that would be put pressure on the opponent. But for the most part, it seems like it is kind of as advertised. You want to play the cards that ramp, and then you want to play the payoffs that help you once you've ramped. So Quandrix has no problem really getting to 8. Like, cards like Bookworm and Fractal Summoning are just right in there. Even that 8-drop mythic rare, the flip one that is 8 cost 5/5, like, it looked like it might be too slow, but I don't think it is. I think it's just totally fine just to put that card in your deck. And Quandrix, I think part of the reason it's so good is it's got so much redundancy. And this is actually, you mentioned Lorehold and actually Witherbloom both being a little split in terms of, do you want to be aggressive? Do you want to be doing something else? One of the strengths of Quandrix is that it's not a question. You have Field Trip to ramp you. You have Cultivate to ramp you. You have Quandrix Cultivator to ramp you. You have Eureka Moment to ramp you. It's like, oh, all these cards ramp you. 2 at common, 2 at uncommon. You have Zimone at uncommon as well. You've got a bunch of card draw spells. You've got all the learn spells. And then you have good cards that kind of pay you off once you get to 7-8 mana. And it's like, okay, so everything's focused that direction. That just means that the Quandrix decks, when it's open or even when it's somewhat contested, can end up being really strong ramp decks, and you don't have the awkward situation. You're like, all right, I've got an Arrogant Poet. Do I want that in my Witherbloom deck? And it's like, well, yes, sometimes, and sometimes no. Whereas you look at, Eureka Moment or Growth Spiral. Do I want this in my Quandrix deck? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, the point you bring up is each of these colleges, thanks to, and we're going to go deep on this, by the way, but learn and lesson, learn, whatever, that mechanic has been a bit of a revelation. Like, if we were doing our day 2 takes, that's all we would talk about. At least for me, because I was like, okay, these look kind of interesting. Are they worth it? Is it a thing? Do you get them often enough? And it's like, yes. Like, they are a must play. They change the way that the games play out pretty significantly almost every time. And the net result of that, particularly in Quandrix, but in the other colors too, is that you don't run out of stuff to spend mana on very often in the format. So it's not really a shock that the deck that is best at producing large amounts of mana is the one that is on top right now. If a format is kind of geared almost mechanically to not run out of gas, the one that can just dump a bunch of lands onto the battlefield is going to be able to dominate. And that's the balance is the other thing I wanted to mention. You touched on it with Quandrix, but it has multiple instances of those things that you mentioned, ways to get lands onto the battlefield or ramp in other ways, and then critically card draw, and then big stuff, right? Like, these is kind of the 1, 2, 3. It's like, make a bunch of mana, but now you're low on cards in your hand. Play something that draws you some cards. Play some expensive stuff. That's kind of the playbook for, like, even cube ramp decks, often follow that pattern, and it's all here, right? It's not hinging on you getting one big spell and you're like, oh, thank God I got my big ramp target. I got a Bookworm. I'm good to go. You always have that type of stuff because you can dig stuff out of your sideboard with, that are, making 4/4s even, just, 3 blue 4/4s. Like, sure, it's just a bunch of place to put my mana, later on in the game. So I'm not shocked now that I know what I know that Quandrix does well, but the consistency with which you can get the pieces that you need to make it work are, to me, why it's the best college.
Another one that I think is very, very good is Prismari. And Prismari does have some aggro capabilities, though I haven't found it mostly leans that direction. I mean, when you have access to things like the Prismari Apprentice, which becomes unblockable, or like Frost Trickster, the 2/2 flyer, that the Flying Frost Links, like these are cards that, of course, can lead somewhat towards an aggro deck. But again, this format overall is going to be more of a controlling one. Like, there are aggro decks, and we'll talk about kind of how that factors in. But lesson and learn, and the scrying dual lands, and just a lot of the cards that have been pushed in this format end up leading you down the path of taking a slightly longer route. And one of the things that I found happens a lot in Prismari is you splash Lorehold cards. So I have found that
Yeah.
Prismari is the deck that I most often splash with. I actually don't splash with Quandrix all that often. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you splash a little red, because you want to get in a Prismari card, or a little black because you got a Witherbloom card. Prismari, I found, splashes Lorehold at a much higher rate because Quandrix just kind of already has it all and doesn't usually need the help. Also, when Prismari is playing, cards like Return Pascal are so good. That's the card I splash the most often. The 6-mana 4/2 flyer that regrowths the instant sorcery or spirit. And it just costs a single white mana. It costs red, red, white, in these Prismari decks. Mm-hmm. Plus you get treasures off of the 7-drop spells. You can play one of the campuses or two. And, one of the MVPs in the entire format is environmental sciences. So being able to splash off that lesson and have access to, sometimes you have decks that have access to like effectively 7 copies of environmental sciences if you look at all your learn cards. And it's just like, it's not hard to splash when you do that. So I like Prismari a lot because, again, it has a lot of good ways to use a lot of mana. And that's, like you touched on, when you have cards that like Learn that give you access to these 6, 7, 8 mana plays, but also can just give you access to 2 and 3 mana plays, that's a real big, count in favor of the decks that are going later because they get to use all their mana up at every point in the game. And Prismari has a lot of good options. One of the things that Prismari features instead of Quandrix is removal. And between like Heated Debate, Igneous Inspiration, and any other red card, plus Bury-in Books, which they can both play, the Prismari decks can just kill all the opponent's stuff really, really easily.
Yeah. I keep thinking when I see, the colleges were a little tricky to decipher because I think of some of the uncommons. Like, what is it called? Prismari Apprentice or whatever, the 2/2 that can get unblockable and bigger that you mentioned. I mean, to me, that's a total non-starter. Like, I look at that and I'm like, I don't want to even touch that card. I have no interest in that. When I see the Flying Frostlinks, I'm like, great, put this in my deck because it slows down my opponent and blocks a flyer. Like, because I'm trying to cast 7-drops here and take over this game and then buy them back or copy them, with all the different ways that you can do that. There is no shortage of the ability to go over the top. If you're in a deck like Prismari, you just need to get yourself to that point where you have enough mana basically to do it. And cards like 2/2 flying lock down a creature for a turn do a great job of that. 2/2s for 2 that get pumped up and hard to block on your own turn. I'm like, I don't even want to touch that thing, right? Like, I'll play the hybrid one.
The Pledge Mage is a lot better. That's the 3/3.
3/3. I'll play that guy because it blocks really well. It's like, I don't care about it. I mean, sure, you chip in with it or whatever. But like, I saw those 2/2-drops and I thought, okay, I get it. They're doing the red-blue thing, right? Which is like, you kind of set up for a while and then you do a couple of things in a turn and something gets pumped twice, something gets unblockable, you hit for 6 and your opponent's like, oh wow, like I just took a lot and I might have to take a lot again next turn. Like, this could be really bad. And that was not where I ended up at all. Instead, I'm looking at the 7 mana instant sorceries, those type of cards. And I'm like, I'd like to cast those. And then I'd like to buy them back and cast them again. And, that to me is where the format's at and where Prismari's at.
So moving on to Witherbloom, this one, there's actually a legit Witherbloom beatdown deck which uses
you need to explain this one to me. Is this the life gain guy gets bigger menace? Is that kind of the thing, or? Yeah.
So you do want Blood Researcher, Biograph, Arrogant Poet, also like the Unwilling Experiment or whatever.
Ingredient.
Ingredient, yeah, and you're basically looking to pressure your opponent with these cards. Witherbloom Apprentice kind of fills in very nicely. Witherbloom also definitely has a good late game kind of aspect to it. It actually has a combo aspect to it that I've run into. I've drafted 2 different Witherbloom decks that got to pull this off, and it's just one of the most fun things I've done in the format. So what you want is either Witherbloom Apprentice or Dinah, the black, green, gold uncommon. Mm-hmm. And so Dinah says every time you gain a life, the opponent loses a life. And then Witherbloom Apprentice says whenever, Magecraft, you drain them for 1. And so then what you do is you make a bunch of pests, either with Tend the Pest sacking like a 5 strength creature, or you just, cast some pest summonings or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you Plumb the Forbidden and sack all the pests. And so Plumb the Forbidden copies itself. So it drains them out with Witherbloom Apprentice. And Dyna also triggers for every pest sacrifice because you gained 1 life in a bunch of different individual triggers. And if you have Apprentice and Dyna both at the same time, then you just Tendrils of Agony your opponent.
Oh, and then you're drawing a bunch of cards too?
And you draw a bunch of cards.
That's sweet.
So I've actually had this come off a few times, and it is actually, I think, legit. Witherbloom can have these dangerous combo style kills. And then, of course, Tend the Pests with like any of the Demagoth, huge like Titans or the 7/6, whatever. Very, very real. Every time one of my opponents plays one of those, I'm very worried they're going to have Tend the Pests, and they seem to have it a decent amount of the time.
Yeah.
Because no one else really wants Tend the Pests. Witherbloom's not that contested of an archetype, and that's not a contested card generally in that deck. So
okay, but you like the assertive version with maybe some combo stuff woven in there.
Well, I'm totally fine drafting the control version as well. Rise of Extus and removal spells, and just good long game cards. So I think either can be fine. You have the access to both, and one of the cool things is the cards that are good in one are still kind of largely good in the other. Arrogant Poet's kind of the outlier there, but Unwilling Ingredient and like Bayou Groff are not terrible cards by themselves.
Right.
Like Witherbloom has ways to make use of those cards. And then, so I'm like not really that unhappy playing either of those things.
Do you feel that the deck runs out of gas in the, in that mode where Quandrix can kind of turbo to and Prismari often gets itself to?
Yeah, I think that's one of the weaknesses of the deck, actually, is it has less raw card draw. Like even something like Pop Quiz is such an integral part of the strategies for both Quandrix and Prismari, right? You're just sitting there and like, oh, I'm going to play my 3-mana card that draws me a card plus a lesson. And it's just so easy to pull ahead when you do that. Whereas Witherbloom, the green and black lesson cards or learn cards are just, they tend to be a lot weaker. Like Rise of Extus is one of the few ones that I think is just fantastic. But like, yeah, you can play Cram Session, the gain 4, but you're not really getting a huge advantage most of the time when you do it. It is a playable card. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't. And like Field Trip is fine, but you are just giving up a little bit when you try to be too controlling. So I kind of like the combo aspect of it, and I've actually found that the Uncontrolled Resurrection, the black-green one that lets you search for a creature with lower casting cost, that actually ends up working out kind of well in those decks, because. Yeah, Rushed Rebirth. That's what it is. And then, of course, by the way, the other common that for black green infused with Vitality is really, really good. That's the one that gives it Death Touch, comes back, and you gain 2. Yeah. Like that card. That's a card I frequently find myself dreading when they have it, and performing very well when I have it.
Yeah, for sure. That card's really, really annoying. It just does all the things that they're trying to do. Okay, well, yeah, I'll give that one a shot again. Again, it just hasn't felt quite as on rails as the first two. What about Lorehold?
So the aggressive Lorehold deck, actually, if you can take a look at a good example, if you go to Sam Party's Twitter, SM Deester, he's been trying just forcing Lorehold aggro just to see kind of how it works out, and he posted at least one example of a pretty good list that he liked. I haven't found much success with Lorehold as an aggressive deck so far, but it's definitely on my list of things to try. And part of the problem I have with the Lorehold control deck is when you're Lorehold control, which you can definitely draft, it is supported, but when you're Lorehold control, at what point are you better off just trying to be Jeskai, Prismari / Lorehold like hybrid?
Yeah.
It's just not that hard to splash,
That's really tough, yeah. Because again, to me, Lorehold has that same problem that I talked about before. Like, if you look at, for example, there's cards like Lorehold Excavation, which make you think, okay, long game, I'll kill my opponent's stuff, I'll gain a little bit of life, I'll fill up my yard, and then I'll just start pumping out these 3/2 spirit tokens, and I'll kind of take over. But then, when you look at some of the other cards that seem to be emblematic of Lorehold, like Lorehold Pledge Mage or a bunch of the combat tricks like Make Your Mark and stuff like that, they're fine Magic cards, but, 2/2 first strike that Mage crafts to get +1/+0 until end of turn versus Lorehold Excavation is like, how am I trying to combine, what is my curve like if I curve Lorehold Excavation into Lorehold Pledge Mage? They don't seem to play nice together. They're on kind of different pages, and it does feel like, do I want to be Returned Past Caller, Lorehold Excavation, Or do I want to be Lorehold, Pledge Mage, make your mark or whatever, you know? And these just are kind of on different ends of the spectrum, and it feels like they're a little, the college is a little confused in that way.
Yeah, I think that you can end up drafting a pretty decent aggro deck. There are some good low curve creatures, which is definitely important. And like you said, combat tricks, like Make Your Mark can be effective. Also, enthusiastic study the +3/+1 trample and learn card. I mean, that's a card that I frequently cut it from my Prismari decks because they're just not looking to go that direction. But when you put that in an aggressive Lorehold deck, then that is a high rate card.
It's a beat.
You're winning a combat, trampling over for a couple points, and just getting to pull something out of your sideboard. Aggro decks can use learn pretty well too. Definitely. It's just a strong mechanic. I wouldn't pigeonhole it as too much as a control mechanic only. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways to get away from the thing you're talking about is just don't put Lorehold Excavation in your deck. I just don't think that card's very good.
Yeah,
I think that
I had
the
a
card
deck
just doesn't do much for you.
Yeah, I had a deck on stream that used it well, but I also had
you had literal Day of Judgment.
Yeah, and I had
that's the perfect combo, by the way.
Yeah, so that was really nice. And I mean, I did see some potential with Lorehold Excavation. I really did, beyond even games where I played a sweeper, just with it giving you some level of inevitability or somewhere to put your mana late. It feels a little out of place in the format because of what we've been talking about. I mean, learn changes everything, right? One of the cards that's really stood out to me is Guiding Voice. That's just white sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature and learn. These type of cards make it so that you're much less likely to run out of gas in the mid to even beginning of the late game, where you can go get sometimes even expensive stuff to get, or just go get something that makes a token or whatever, Spirit Summoning or the one that makes a 4/4. And to me, those get in the way of a card like Lorehold Excavation. So it might be an okay card that just doesn't have a great home here. It also might just be too slow to really be good. I haven't figured that part out yet.
Yeah, I have found my controlling Lorehold decks dip into blue often enough, or Prismari splash Lorehold, that's the way that kind of goes down. But you know what? There are still plenty of good Lorehold cards that go late, and sometimes you can just end up being straight Lorehold. I have to actually give R&D credit for making a red-white control deck an actual draftable, kind of theme.
It is a cool take.
Actually, so Pilgrim of the Ages, the 2/1 that searches for a plains, that card goes really good, goes well in the deck and lets you kind of punch late game. It lets you kind of punch above your weight class late game by getting you extra lands, trading off, coming back, triggering your leave the graveyard stuff, and then Pillar Drop Rescue. Pillar Drop Rescue is also a nice one. The 5-mana 2/2 flyer. Because I think intentionally put some pretty strong 3-mana plays into the deck. And when you're getting back a Professor of Symbology or, one of your 3-mana 3/3s with a good ability, then you can really get there. So
yeah,
I think Lorehold's interesting. I still have a little bit more to learn in terms of the aggro aspects of it. But I got to say, I'm pretty lost when it comes to Silver Quill. I've played against Silver Quill aggro decks. I played against Silver Quill control decks. I drafted Silver Quill once, and it was kind of mediocre. I think I just need more time, more time studying.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've talked about Quandrix, Prismari, Witherbloom, Lorehold, and Quandrix and Prismari. Neither of them have a good aggro build. Witherbloom dips into it, as you mentioned, are you doing the 2/1 that can get flying or whatever, but isn't a primarily aggressive deck necessarily. It's more towards the mid-range, even if it can lean a little more aggressive. Lorehold, which would normally be the bastion for aggression, they've seemed to have split it down the middle where there's some aggressive cards and some curve cards, combat tricks, but then on the other end, there's 6-mana 4/2 flyers that buy back creature, spirits, instants, and sorceries. There's 5-mana 2/2 flyers that buy you back a creature. There's just slower, grindier, Lorehold Excavation type stuff. So it's not obviously an aggressive color pair either, even if there is a particular build, maybe. And Silver Quill, same thing. Where are the aggressive decks in the format? Silver Quill, to me, yes, there are some aggressive-ish takes that you can have on it, but it feels the most lost of all of these. When my opponent has played Silver Quill against me, it's felt very much, and I've played it a couple times too, but when I've played it, frankly, it's felt very, very reliant on raw card quality that I draw or that they draw. Very much like I don't feel that that's the case for any of the other ones where there's real synergies happening, things leaving the graveyard, buying stuff back, etc. for, fill in the blanks for each of the colleges. But for Silver Quill, boy, I just feel like it's like, you better draw that mythic rare you first picked, your Extus or, whatever, because if you don't, you're just playing too fair. It just feels like you're just playing a bunch of Magic cards, but they're not really doing enough together. Even not even like an aggressive sort of bend to it where they all work together in the sense that you're curving out and removing stuff and combat tricks and all that. I can't figure out what it is that the awesome Silver Quill deck looks like. Like, I don't think I've seen one. And when my opponents played it against me, I'm like, we're going to go toe to toe for 4 or 5 turns. And then I'm just going to simply have more action, more mana, and more stuff to do than you do, and I'm going to win. And that's what's been happening.
The ones I felt the most in danger of is the aggro decks, and which I agree does, card quality is definitely a factor. People have to have, like Killian or the Lorehold Scribe, like the Light Scribe, the Leonin, and good removal spells. I will say that the Owl and Shield Mage is a pretty good threat. When they play the 3/3 flyer and you're at low life total, it's like, wow, to deal with this, I have to just get chunked for another 3.
Yes, like, that card's good.
It's funny because Ward, when we first saw it, it's mostly like, oh, pay 2 more, pay 3 more, whatever. And that can be really strong early, but falls off late. This card actually gets better late because they have less life to work with. And all of a sudden, I've also gotten blown out where you like target it with something, pay the 3 life, and then they play a trick or something to save it.
Ugh, that's brutal.
It's just like gross. So I think that the answer is ultimately going to be Silver Quill is an aggressive deck, but it has seemed to be one of the guilds, not only are the colleges I've drafted least, but also that I play against, I think, less. I don't know. There's 8 people and 5 colleges, right, in a normal draft table, and we'll end up. You'll end up having 3 of the colleges drafted twice, and I think Silver Quill is most often going to be one of the ones drafted once. And sometimes you'll have like 3 people in one of them and 0 people in another, but like most of the time it's going to even out to like 2, 2, 2, 1, 1.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can see the framework for a really good deck that's based around learn, right? Like, this is the home of Rise of Extus, which is the 6 mana sorcery, exile a creature and a instant or sorcery from a graveyard and then learn. So that's a really nice 2-for-1. You also get access to the best lesson at common, which is the 2/1 flyer. And there's a lot of ways to curve into that as well, so that you can have that almost every single time on turn 3 you're playing a 2/1 flyer. And then they did put some type of late game into it with this taxation type stuff, right? The thing that you just mentioned with 3/3 flyer, but also, there's the uncommon that when creatures with +1/+1 counters on them attack, it drains them. There's the 3/4 that drains them whenever, reverse Magecraft drains them for 1. There's a lot of this sort of picking at you until you're dead. And then you also get to back that up with, ostensibly one of the best 2-color removal packages that you could have. It should be there. It just hasn't come together in like I get it now, this is awesome way. So more to follow on that. One thing I did want to mention before we continue, by the way, is Ward. So we didn't mention this. I missed the memo somehow, but apparently it's going to be evergreen. So this is just a thing now. Yeah,
it seems like a fine evergreen mechanic, especially replacing hexproof.
Yeah, you'd assume it replaces hexproof, right?
Yes, I don't. It would be pretty weird to have those two coexisting. I mean, you might end up with a set where something wants hexproof for a specific reason and they don't have ward, but it would be pretty weird to me to have both those in the same set.
How about on the same card?
That would not really make sense. Yeah.
Combo.
If you get past my first shield, you got to get to my second.
That's right. See, it just makes you feel extra safe. Okay, so let's talk about. So those are the colleges as we see them at the moment. But even bigger picture than those are the mechanics of the set, especially ones that cross over into all of the colleges, which is learn and lessons.
Speaking of learn and lessons, by the way, before we get into it, we do have the Limited Resources versus Lords of Limited showdown coming up on Friday. We forgot to mention that in the intro.
Good point. Good point.
But we're tied 1-1, so I'm excited to see kind of how this turns out. Me, you, and BK are taking on the Lords plus Court of Calls, Alex, and that'll be Friday the 23rd at 6 p.m. Pacific. I think most or all of us are going to be streaming it. Usually, like, you get everyone, but sometimes, we'll see what ends up happening. But you can watch us take on a team draft here, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Yep, it's the good guys versus the tryhards, and we'll see who comes out on top this time. Yeah, that'll be really sweet, though. It's always cool to get those so early in the format. I mean, like you mentioned, we know more than we would have in years past, but still, it's still, there's still cards I haven't played yet, right? So that's early enough. So anyway, learning lessons, right? Boy, this has had a much, much bigger impact on the format than it looked like it might at first glance.
Yeah. It was funny that one of the early debates is like, is it better to draw a card than learn? And it's like, well, early in the game, you'd probably rather draw a card, but late in the game, learn is better. And now it's just like, yeah, learn is better most of the time.
Most of the time, because you can get the lessons that you want. You do have to prioritize them to a point, but that's really that was the question, right? Will I always have access to, say, a lesson that augments my hand, puts a basic land into it or draws me a card or whatever, or is a creature, like a permanent of some sort? And so far it's been like, yeah, you can pretty much get those if you want. Yeah,
it's tricky to me. So where you should take them hasn't settled. I suspect in a week or 2 weeks, when the format's really gotten underway, you will be taking environmental sciences really high. I already do, but you do actually want to balance it. Like, if other people aren't taking these cards as highly as you should actually reduce your pick order to some degree as well. Why first pick a card if you can just get them 7th? You're just wasting picks.
Yeah.
I just think environmental sciences is the most important lesson. In fact, we're going to do a little lesson in ranking, as it were.
Okay.
And it's the best lesson, except, of course, Mascot Exhibition, which barely counts. Mascot Exhibition is the 7 mana, put a bunch of tokens into play at Mythic Rare, and I'm so glad it's Mythic. It's one of the highest win rate cards, according to 17 Lands. To look at the tape, and I've gotten to play with the card. Just having the 7-drop kind of pseudo bomb in the sense that, like, if it wasn't a lesson, it wouldn't quite be a bomb. Like, it's not like that much more crazy than elemental summoning, the 7 mana make 2 4/4s.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's a 7-drop that's always in your hand when you want it in your hand.
Yeah.
And that's just incredible. I'm glad they only made one card really like that, because
Same.
I think it'd be a little obnoxious to play too many of them. But yeah, that card is awesome.
That card is sweet, and it's on a little island of its own. But going down, you have environmental sciences ahead of Inkling Summoning.
Yes, and
is that because it's colorless, or do you think it's just better? Because I think Inkling Summoning's better as a card.
I think that having access to environmental sciences is less replaceable than any other effect.
Okay.
If you're a color that can play Inkling Summoning, well, you can also play Pest Summoning. Those two, or and as a result, or Spirit Summoning. Every color can play. Every college can play 3 different summonings. Making them hybrid was awesome. I think that was a really cool kind of design choice. And the difference between 1 and 0 environmental sciences is the difference between all of your learn cards helping fix your mana, hit your land drops, get your 3rd color if you're playing a 3rd color, and not. And that's just such a big divide that I'm not above like 2nd or 3rd picking the first copy of environmental sciences. Afterwards, it falls off a cliff. You just don't need to have 2 in the same game that often.
Are you also assuming that you're playing 3 colors in a lot of these decks, where this is not just hitting a land drop, but also fixing your mana?
No, this is with the assumption that you're 2 colors more often than 3.
Wow. Okay.
I just think it's that important. And it will change depending on what your learn cards are, but there's enough cheap ones that having access to it. I mean, I have, kept on the play a 2-lane hand and gone Mountain Go. They play another, they play a land or whatever. Turn 2, I play my 2nd land, and then when they play their creature, I Academic Dispute at end of turn, so I can just cast Environmental Sciences on my 3rd turn when I would have missed a land drop.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That's just a play you get to make. So I have Environmental Sciences super high. I do think Inkling Summoning is the next best one.
Okay.
It's just the only thing keeping Inkling Summonings down a little is I think it goes in generally the worst colleges. Whereas the blue and green and to some degree red cards with learn are so strong that those, the lessons you can get off those are very, very good as a result. But Inkling Summoning on rate is really, really strong. It's actually one of the few lessons. Inkling Summoning Environmental Science is actually one of the few lessons I don't mind playing in the main deck if I have extra copies of.
Yeah,
I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
I like Illuminate History a lot too. That's the rare, the 2 red, discard any number of cards, draw that many, and then if you have 7 cards in your graveyard, make a 3/2. Because especially in these like late game Prismari or Lorehold decks, it's almost always going to make a 3/2. It's just not that hard to have 7 cards, especially after you've discarded some. And it lets you cycle out a bunch of unnecessary lands. So it's kind of like a 4-mana Spirit Summoning that also lets you trade in a land or two. And that's just a more powerful effect than you normally see out of these lesson cards.
I see. And it's always going to happen at the time that you want it to happen because you're searching it up and don't have to have that liability in your deck. What's next?
So here we've got Fractal Summoning, Elemental Summoning, and Pest Summoning. And I think they're all very, very close. Also Spirit Summoning, actually just the 4 summonings. Like, I think in order, Fractal Summoning is a little better than Elemental Summoning, which is a little better than Pest Summoning, which is a little better than Spirit Summoning. But I think it's just basically which colors are you at that point. And in particular, Fractal Summoning is nice because it's modular. So your Quandrix decks can play it for, a million mana. You can play it for 9 mana if you want. But just having access to the difference between having access to one of these summonings versus not is really, really big. And I think it's really critical that you have at least one and often multiple. Whereas with environmental sciences, you don't really need multiple because you're just not going to go through that whole rigmarole more than once. With cards like Fractal, Elemental, Pest, or Spirit Summoning, you will frequently play like 2 or even 3 in your sideboard, knowing that your lessons can always hit you a nice creature.
Yeah, it's been interesting because, just zooming out slightly here, we talked a lot in Kaldheim about picking snowlands and about how much you just needed to pick lands, right? Cards that weren't part of the 23 card core of your deck. And that was a skill or something that you needed to be aware of to be really good at drafting Kaldheim. And here we continue the trend, but these are more exciting cards to take than just a land. But you're actually taking quite a few cards now between lands and, because there's still dual lands in the format that are pretty desirable. And then also these lessons as well. You're really kind of having to walk this line. And it occurred to me that this is kind of a relic of the fact that they don't print cards that are basically unplayable anymore, right? Yeah. Especially at Common, is that you still I still have way more than enough playables, even after having dedicated
5 or 6 cards.
Yeah, even though I have 3 or 4 medium to high picks that I've put on lesson cards. So that really does, they've used that space that they've created in a really cool way here.
So after all the summonings, I like Basic Conjuration.
Which one is that?
So that's the
rare green one, right?
The rare green one, right?
That
yes.
Searches through 6 cards.
Yeah, let's look at the top 6. Put a creature in your hand and gain 3. It's just a decent way to turn your lesson into some more value.
Yeah.
Necrotic Fumes, the black sack one or exile one to exile a creature is fine. Introduction to Prophecy is pretty important. The 5-cost colorless one that exiles a creature and they draw a card, or exiles an online permanent and they draw a card.
That's an Annihilation one, right?
Oh, sorry, Annihilation one. Yeah, the introductions. So I actually have all 3 of the colorless ones right next to each other. So that's Introduction to Prophecy, Expanded Anatomy, and Introduction to Annihilation.
Yeah.
Where I kind of want access to all of them.
Yes.
And because Introduction to Annihilation is a kind of an escape hatch for any problematic creature or permanent. Introduction to Prophecy means you can always trade in your lesson cards for the shots at something from your deck. That's the Scry 2 draw card. And then Expanded Anatomy is the one that's then the most surprising to me. I think this card's actually great. It just really does what you want.
Very impactful card. Yeah. It did not look like it. It looked like a throwaway, right? Like it was like, they wanted to here's some card draw, here's some removal. Let's do something that helps out your board, can get you over the top. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to really be messing with that. It matters every time somebody casts that stupid card. There's always some, little flyer or whatever. They can pick up the counters and have it count.
And it just turns out Yeah, we thought, okay, if we have access to this card, maybe we'll get it every now and then. When this card's in my sideboard, I probably get it twice per draft or so, maybe 3 times. It just goes on a lot of different things. The vigilance is such a big part of it. You just get to set up this turn where you get to get a big hit and still have a big defender. Academic Probation's a rare one. That's the next one, and that one's fine. It basically stuns a creature for a turn, or non-land permanent actually, so it can't do anything for a turn. So it's the sort of thing where having this means that, especially in an aggressive deck, you all of a sudden on your last turn you can go learn Probation. It's actually like a really efficient way to get something out of the way.
It's a removal spell if you can win that turn.
Yeah. Reduced to Memory, that's like the Beast Within one that makes exiles and they get a 3/2. It's fine. It's a little worse than giving them a card, I think. Just most of the time giving them a card is a little bit better for you, but it's still fine. And then you have some of the really like niche ones, like Start from Scratch is the ping for 1 or destroy an artifact. Containment Breach is the disenchant. Teachings of the Archaics is the divination if you have less cards on them, or a draw 3 if you have 4 less cards in them. Mm-hmm. Again, all these are fine things to have access to, but they just don't come up all that often. Mercurial Transformation makes a creature into a 1/1 or a 4/4. The reason to have this, as many pointed out, was you attack, they block, post-combat you transformation, and if it has damage on it, it dies. But that's just not a play that you really want to be making all that well anyway. And then Confront the Past, the rare like Planeswalker one, is just whatever. So
yeah.
Overall, yeah, lessons are really, really strong. I frequently find myself wanting about, as many 4 or 5 ways to get to learn, and then like 4 or 5 lessons. And the more, the better. I haven't really run into the problem of kind of diminishing returns. Like, yes, you at some point you're going to need to take cards that go in your deck. You can't just be doing this. But one of the things that's really strong is I think a lot of games you'd get decked due to lack of threats if you didn't have this. But these control decks can just play learn cards and then just start pulling fractal summonings and elemental summonings out of their board to finish off the opponent. And that just gives you this kind of inevitability that it doesn't really cost you much, because you're like, okay, I have to put pop quizzes and igneous inspirations in my deck. Well, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that when we looked at these, there was kind of 2 big picture questions that I had, at least. And the first one ended up being not a question at all, which is like, how low on the scale do I want to go for the learn cards, and how many lesson cards am I trying to actually get? And it turns out I will go all the way down on the learn scale. If it says learn and does anything, which I think the closest to nothing is the gain life one. And I haven't played it, but people have said you can even just do that. But the white one's been the one that's impressed me. Put a +1/+1 counter and learn. It's just like, wow, that's excellent. It's like, dang. And you can see why they were really careful with tacking learn onto creatures, right? Like the, was it Professor of Symbology? Like that's an uncommon, and it's just a 2/1 for 2 that learns when it ETBs, but it's like, that card's good. And we gave it a good grade, and we knew it was going to be good. It is. Like getting lessons is really powerful. So I'm willing to go all the way down on that scale. So that's off the table. And then what about for the lessons? Well, I'm going to have about as many of them as I can reasonably get. So that answers those questions. But the other question, and this is one that I've gotten in the chat a bunch, is when do we take what, right? If you open up a good pack, there's a solid learn card, there's a solid lesson card. Which ones are you supposed to prioritize? And I've been prioritizing the lesson cards because those seem much harder to get than a random learn card that, even if it has a minimal impact, I'm still fine putting it in my deck because it's just tacking an extra mana and a little bit of effect onto what could end up being a good creature or, a much needed or timely spell.
I've been doing the same. Also, another thing to think about is, with the exception of like the higher rarity ones here, you're talking about colorless cards and hybrid cards that just go in way more decks. So you're competing with everyone at the table for cards like Environmental Sciences. You're only competing with other Prismari drafters and Quandrix drafters for Pop Quiz. Yeah. So I too have been basically, once I have the optimal lesson setup, which I consider like the minimum of an Environmental Sciences, a summoning, and like an introduction to Prophecy, then at that point I often will make sure I have enough of the learn cards, and of course, getting Expanded Anatomy and Introduction to Annihilation is great too. But like just that initial group of 2 or 3 cards, really just Environmental Sciences and a Summoning is like the bare minimum. Once I have those, I feel pretty comfortable. But until I have all those, I'm going to be filling that out before I'm passing up on most of the lessons.
Same. There's a few exceptions, because like if I showed you, say, one of the 1 or 2 mana learn cards, or like an Inkling Summoning or Environmental Sciences, as we've both just said, we're going for the lesson there. But it does get a little more interesting when you get up to Rise of Extus or something like that, where it's like, this is a really strong card for my deck that does a thing on its own that's worth having in my deck. And I know I will get some type of lessons. It's not like, I don't think I've had a deck that had literally none. Right. And, so that's where it gets a little bit closer, but definitely lean towards the lessons, get those checkboxed, because those are such high value slots for your deck, because you get to draft 26 cards now instead of 23. We've been talking about this since, people figured out that it was really smart to take lands really highly in cube. You get to use more cards than your opponent when everything's good. And while the landscape for a normal set like this isn't the same as it is for cube, where every card's kind of on another level busted, it really is flat in the sense that all the cards are pretty good. And if you have to dip down into a card that we would deem unplayable, it's probably not. It's probably just slightly worse than the cards right above it. And it'll be worth it if you get access to 3 to 4 spells out of your sideboard as well. One quick thing before we talk about some individual cards, although we've probably covered many of them. But you said that you were fine being 2 color versus 3 color. I wanted your take, because I've actually found myself being 3 color the majority of the time. Most of my decks have been 3 color. I would say somewhere around 60%. I think I've done 8 or 9 drafts, and I think 6 of them or something have been 3 color decks already, which I didn't anticipate. The fixing's there, but I just kind of thought that we'd be more incentivized to stay within the bounds of our college. But it turns out the hybrid mana and the relative ease of fixing means that splashing around isn't really as bad, and frankly, Environmental Sciences as well. And I have been pretty liberally splashing, especially given the way that the games have gone when they go so long, where I kind of want access to more powerful other stuff, down the line. Where are you at? You said that you aren't splashing quite as often as I am.
No, I have found myself not splashing with Quandrix most of the time, because I just don't feel like I'm ever lacking action. And splashing with Prismari probably like 40% of the time.
Okay.
So less than you, but yes, you can definitely play 3 colors in this format. The cycle of common lands, the fixing, Environmental Sciences, of course, being a big part of it. Definitely not hard to do so if you end up having appealing splash cards.
Okay, and then also I remembered we didn't do a freaking Crack-a-Pack. So maybe if Jeff has one, or I can try to dig something up. But let's talk about these cards while we do that, and we'll save it. Jeff says he's on it. We'll do that for the end. We've decided, editorially decided, to save the Crack-a-Packs for the end of the show, so that we can apply all of our new knowledge to it. Let's talk about some cards though that have stood out in one way or the other. One of them really solid, Combat Professor, the 3 and a white 2/3 flyer that gives something +1/+0 and vigilance at the beginning of combat. Nice, good common, and it's been really solid. It's impressed.
Whenever my opponent plays that, it's always really annoying, and whenever I play it, it's like, wow, I'm putting a lot of pressure on my opponent. So yeah, I have been impressed with it for sure.
Yeah, especially at common. And then another one that we touched on is Pilgrim of the Ages. That's the 2 and a white 2/1, and when it ETBs, you can search for a plains and put it in your hand. And you can pay 6 mana, return it from the graveyard to your hand. This is the end of Lorehold that I'm interested in, right? Like, this is an expendable blocker that comes back later and is like the grindiest of grindy, where you're getting lands out of your deck after you've already got 6-7 lands already, and just thinning it and just kind of doing that whole thing. Not what you expect from red white, but maybe this is more of a Silver Quill card or something, but whatever, it's sweet and it's really overperformed. I'm a big fan of the card.
Definitely. When you have like a 3/2 and they play this, you're just like, oh my God, really?
Mm-hmm. Another one that stood out to me is Flunk. That's the uncommon. It's 1 and a black. Instant target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is 7 minus the number of cards in that creature's controller's hand. And it's kind of interesting because it's easy to flunk the card, right? Like it's like I was playing in that pre-release thing I mentioned. And so I'm playing with real cards on a webcam, and my opponent goes, I'm going to flunk your whatever. And I'm like, what does that do? And they read it, and I'm like, cool. What does that do? Like, what does my creature actually get? Right. And then they're like, it's like -5/-5. I'm like, oh my God, that's a 2-mana instant that just took out like my very large creature. Flunk is actually like pretty dang good.
Yeah. Flunk is great.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan, although it does take some reading, at least for me, every single time. What do you got here? Academic Dispute. Which one's that again?
Yeah. So this is an instant for a single red mana target creature blocks this turn if able, and you may give it reach plus learn. I tweeted a couple days ago that this is basically Annihilate, which is an old card that was kill target creature, draw a card. I have found Academic Dispute to be nothing short of excellent. So it does a lot of different stuff for you. One of the things it does is when you have an early brawler, which both the red pledge mages, so the 2-mana 3/3 or the 2/2 first strike that gets +1/+0, both of those work so well with Dispute. Because you play a Prismari pledge mage on turn 2, any 2-drop they play, you just get to go dispute it, attack, you have to block by 3/3, it dies. Or you play a Lorehold pledge mage on turn 3, next turn, play dispute, attack with my 3/2 first strike, you have to block it. And it also lets you give one of your creatures reach because it's an instant. So they attack you with their 2/2 flyer. You're like, okay, give my 3/3 reach, block.
And learn.
And not to mention that the fact that it's learn means you're drawing a card off of it. And like I said earlier in the show, you'll just cast it sometimes, cycle it away, as it were, on turn 2 to pick up an Environmental Sciences or a Summoning, just because you don't anticipate combat happening soon. So it's a 1-mana card that can often be an easy 2-for-1, and at worst still just picks up a lesson when you need it to. I have found this card to be truly excellent.
Yeah, I've actually liked it quite a bit too. The next card to talk about is Explosive Welcome. This is one of the cards I want to see the most. It's the 7 and a red instant that does 5 damage to any target and 3 damage to any other target, and then it happens to add triple red to your mana pool. But like, this thing's great, man. Every time, because the thing is that copying and or buying back these things is very much a thing in Prismari, and while copying this is difficult, buying it back isn't that bad. And you know, I've had games where I've cast this multiple times, quite often, and that's often.
It also just turns out that 8-mana cards are just something you can do in this format.
Yes.
Some formats you can, some you can't. This is one where 8-mana cards, I don't even blink an eye at it. Actually, I wanted to mention an 8-mana card, Mizzix's Mastery. This is the 3 and a red sorcery that lets you play a spell from your graveyard, and then has overload of 5 red and lets you play all the spells.
This might be from the, what's it called, right? From the Mystical
Archives.
Yeah.
I think this might be the best first pick in the set.
What?
It's unbeatable. Like,
because you can pitch those cards.
So, not because you can pitch the 7-drops and play them on turn 3, though that is part of the range.
Okay.
Because it's 8 mana win the game. Like, think of how good Explosive Welcome or Bookworm is. Imagine one of those, except you just straight up wins you the game. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've had it in 2 drafts so far, and I was able to draft around it. In both those drafts, I think I got 7 wins both times, and of those 14 wins, I believe 10 of them came from just overloading it. Because when you have this in your hand, you're just playing a Prismari deck that just sits there and just does Prismari things, and then on turn 7 or 8, if you have a treasure, it could be turn 7, you just cast it and you win because you cast 6 spells out of your graveyard.
That's incredible. What is the overload cost on it?
5 red.
Wow.
So,
okay. Yeah, I'm sold.
And here's the other thing. It's an 8-mana win the game that also has the mode of 4-mana play at expensive spell if that's what you need at the time.
Wow.
So your 8-mana like super Plague Wind that kills all their creatures, draws you 5 cards, and puts 2 4/4s into play. Also, it lets you just buy out for 4 mana if you're in dire straits.
Right,
so,
and you can do broken stuff with that too, right? I mean, you can have 2 4/4s on turn 3. Like, there's not a lot of decks that beat that. So
No, and then like you just have stuff like, oh, I cast Curate or I cast Thrilling Discovery and discarded this like decent spell, and then I cast a Heated Debate to kill your thing, and then I played a Learn card and played Elemental Summoning, and then you're like, all right, well, so when I cast Overload, I get a 4/4, I kill 2 of your things, I get to go search my deck for a land and gain 2 life, I get to learn again, you just do all these things, and it doesn't really require much deck building either because you're already going to put all these cards in your deck. Prismari also already just plays a bunch of spells. So yeah, I have found the card to be truly fantastic. And again, to look at win rates, it's one of the highest win rate cards when it's in your hand. Not when played, because we already know that's not a good way to look at it. Right. It's one of the highest win rate cards in your hand. So that card has just been truly unbelievable for me.
Speaking of 3 in a red, what about Pillar Drop Warden?
So this is the 1/5 reach that you can pay 2, tap, and sack it as sorcery to regrowth a spell to get an instant sorcery back to your hand. Mm-hmm. And again, this kind of does what we looked at in the set review. We're like, wow, it's a good defensive creature with a late game application. Well, guess what? I'm in for that. I have found it to be good at blocking just random things early, and then late in the game, you're like, oh, I get back my creative expression or my elemental summoning or whatever you want, and it's just a good card. Oh, sometimes you just get back a Heated Debate because you need to kill one of their creatures. I found Pillar Drop Warden to be a really good part of these Prismari decks, and part of the reason that you don't actually get decked despite having all this card draw is that you just have ways like this to recur your big spells. This is actually why I put a really high premium on the first like Explosive Welcome or Creative Expression. That's the 7 mana deal 5. Look at your top 5 and put 1 in your hand. The first copy of a really impactful spell is really, really important because you have all these ways to recur it between Pillar Drop Warden, if you're splashing for like Radiant Scroll Wielder, a lot of ways to make use of this. You even have like Ardent Dust Speaker to put it back on bottom of your deck, and then sometimes you can like shuffle to get it back. So I have really been impressed with Pillar Drop Warden.
Yeah, I like it a lot too. Also, it has sneaky reach. People have multiple times since in their 2/1 flyer. So that's
I've eaten some 2/1s with this, that's for sure.
Yeah, Rutha, as good as advertised. That's the 1 red blue 1/4. And you can pay 2 and return her to your hand to copy an instant or sorcery spell you control and choose new targets for the copy. Card is sick. Man, I've done some stupid stuff with that card.
Oh, Ruth is obscene. Just a bomb. Someone tweeted at us, like, change my mind. Ruth is an A. I'm like, no, I don't really want to change your mind.
Yeah, no.
I'm good.
No, you're right.
Also, I've had my opponents try to kill my Rutha, and you can't just return Rutha to your hand at whim. You have to have a spell in the stack. But I play Rutha with like 8 mana, and on their turn they're like Rise of Extus, your Rutha, and you're like,
I know, and you're like this. Okay, you start, putting your hands together.
Heated Debate your creature, bounce Rutha, kill your other creature. Oh, look, it's gone.
Yeah, and your Rise of Extus just got counter.
Well, they can target a spell in the graveyard, so they don't get completely.
Oh, it still resolves. Oh, that's annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a card that I've seen you put into multiple decks when I've been watching you stream and some screenshots or whatever. Teach by Example. This is the blue-red hybrid instant that copies the next instant or sorcery that you play.
Yeah, this is a card we were pretty down on the set review, and I'm still not like super high on it. This is not an auto-include. But this is a card I've found has applications for a few reasons. One is that it stacks you 3 Magecraft triggers because you cast this new spell, then you copy a new spell. That's 3. So if you have any good Magecraft cards, this can really pop off with those. The other is that your Prismari decks just have 14 spells in them sometimes. And given that, this card will often enough do something good for 2 mana that it's worth including. Because when you copy a Heated Debate or a Bury in Books, like that's pretty good. Copying a Pop Quiz, that's not as good because you don't really want to draw 4 when you're drawing 2. Like that's not twice as good usually just because you're already drawing a bunch of action. But it just gets to turn 2 mana into good effect. And it's not out of the question to copy like a 6 or 7 mana spell with this card.
Right.
Just
it does
because
happen.
Yeah, sometimes you just like have this and you set it up and you're like, all right, I'm gonna cast like Elemental Summoning on 7 mana and cast Elemental Summoning, get 2 4/4s, or even better, like I have copied Creative Expression with this because you can get to 9 mana in this set. And in most decks that have a lot of spells, I feel like Teach by Example is worth playing.
Okay. Yeah, I've tried it out a few times, and it feels like you definitely never want two of them, and that it's conditional, but the upside's there. A couple of cards to talk about before we do our planned Crack-a-Pack. Cody. So I saw that, was it Corticals was saying that Cody's better than it looks or something on Twitter?
Yeah. So
I think it was Alex that was saying that. I mean,
Alex was like, yeah, Cody can be quite good. Someone else tweeted out saying, like, I'm staking my claim. This is going to be the best pick one in the set by the end of the format. Well, that's not going to happen. But
no, I think Cody's still not great, right? Like, I'm really trying to, like, I understand that better than terrible is a thing, but like, does that make it good?
So I've played with Cody again 4 times now, and 2 of those times it was very good, and then 2 of those times it didn't work out great. And here's kind of my conclusion is in a deck that has a lot of spells, step 1, and a lot of ways to make tokens, step 2, I think Cody is going to be one of your better cards. It's a must kill. Because if you look at the ability, you spend 4 and you get Wooburg. So it actually puts you up 1 mana.
Okay.
So you play this, and then you can start turboing out things or adding a mana. And then the first spell you play each turn gets cascade to another spell. So what will happen is you'll play Cody, and then on your next turn, you're going to spend 4 mana to get 5 mana, spend that 5 mana to play something, which will then play another thing, and you're just going to bury them in card advantage. The main drawback is that you can't play some of your cards. Well, just your deck hopefully doesn't have tons of permanents if you're trying to use Cody, because you want to have like a lot of spells. And it's really important. Here's the part that some of my decks that played it ended up not liking it, was you need a lot of the summonings. You need fractal summoning, elemental summoning. You need ways to put creatures into play so that you have ways to make sure you're impacting the board. Because look, as fun as it is to use Cody, cast Eureka Moment, and hit Pop Quiz, like you do need to put something on the board in order to actually make progress, and you need to be able to kill them. Though one of the decks I had, it was Prismari with tons of spells. It had some ways to make tokens, but actually one of the ways that I was successful with Cody is I used Cody a bunch of times, probably got 4 extra cards off it, and then I just heated debate my own Cody and then just played all the cards I started to draw.
Okay, that's cool.
Think about it this way.
So you're pro book burning now? Is that what you're saying?
If Cody's drawback isn't huge, then it's a 3 mana 1/4 that taps to add a mana to your mana pool and plays a spell for free every turn. Mm-hmm. Like that is a fantastic card, right?
It is. Yeah. The thing that I would be worried about is that, like, what's the minimum cost that I would want? 4? 3 maybe minimum? I mean, I want to cast a 5-drop so that I could cascade in. Like, if I'm casting something that costs 2 mana, I'm much less excited, you know?
Yeah. What you do want to try and do is a few things. One is, first of all, have a lot of spells. Second, it's really nice to have like a 1-drop and a couple 2-drops so that when you cascade your lower cost spells, you're still getting value. One of the sweeter decks I had was Sultai. It was like Quandrix Witherbloom, and I had 2 copies of Lash of Malice, the +2/-2 for 1 mana, so that when I cast a 2 mana spell after using Cody, I knew I would hit Lash of Malice, that was kind of cool. But mostly, yeah, you're going to want to use it so you can cast your 5 mana spells. Burying Books is actually really good with this.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a 5 mana spell no matter when you play it. Though the other thing that you have to watch out with Cody is if you do play an instant on their turn, you won't be able to play the other card unless it's also an instant. It doesn't straight up Mind's Desire, or it Mind's Desires you. It doesn't Shelldock Isle you. It doesn't let you just cast it whenever.
I see. And then I assume that if your cheap spells have Learn, then you're happy.
Yes, that is part of the way to kind of break this is like you use Cody. That earlier example, you use Cody, you play Eureka Moment, it cascades into Pop Quiz, and then you find Elemental Summoning off Pop Quiz. Then next turn you use Cody, play Elemental Summoning, and then you play something good off that, and you're kind of just off to the races at that point.
Yeah, that seems cool. The last card I wanted to talk about is Strixhaven Stadium.
I haven't seen this one in play.
I have. My opponent played against me twice, and it was hilarious. So this is the 3-mana artifact that taps to add a colorless, and then you put a point counter on it. And whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you remove a point counter from it. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on it. Then if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove all of them, and that player loses the game. It was bad. The fact that my opponent was trying to be aggressive, but also just played a random 3-drop that just didn't do anything was a real hit. I will say it made my removal a lot more potent when I was able to take out the remaining threats while they're on their Strixhaven Stadium. Now, they then drew removal and made things interesting because they were just tapping the stadium to try to get me. Overall, I would say I'm down on the card. I think even in the aggressive decks, I'm not going to recommend it. Okay, Luis, let's do a crack-a-pack before we sign off here, since we planned on doing it at the end of the show. Strixhaven crack-a-pack, our very first one. And then we also have to talk about one other thing for the set before we go, but we'll get through this first. And the first card is, well, we'll start with our, what's it called? Mystical, whatever. Agonizing Remorse. This is 1 in a black sorcery. This one's uncommon. Target opponent reveals their hand. They choose an online card from it, or their graveyard. You choose an online card from it or their graveyard, and then you exile it and you lose a life. Totally fine card. Basic. Oh, this is the rare. Oh, we have lots of rares here. We have 2 rares. Can this be a rare? Is that what the deal is?
Yeah, I don't even really try to figure out how many rares, uncommons, or commons can be in any pack. I just open the packs and see what the cards are available to me.
Well, let's just this is the one that we got, so we're going to go with it. Basic Conjuration is the 1 green lesson that we talked about that looks at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature from among them, put it in your hand, then the rest go on the bottom in a random order, and you shuffle. That's a good one. That's a card I would consider.
Yeah, not bad.
We've got Burog Befuddler as our foil. It's 1 in a blue 2/1 flash frog wizard, and when it ETBs, creature an opponent controls gets -1/-0 until end of turn. Have yet to play one of these, Luis. This just doesn't seem like the format for Burog Befuddler.
No, this format doesn't have enough early combat, and the stats of this just don't work. So yeah. I'm off it.
Now, Spectacle Mage is exactly well suited for this format. 1 blue-red 2/2 flyer that makes instants and sorceries you cast with mana value 5 or greater cost 1 less to cast. Beautiful little birdie. This thing's great. I love that card.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with it. It does its job no matter what. Like sometimes it will reduce the cost of your cards, but it's always a Windrake, and yep. I'm pretty impressed with that.
Leech Fanatic is the 1 in a black 2/2 that gets lifelink as long as it's your turn. Another card that's serviceable, but just doesn't seem really super well suited in the format. Maybe if if your deck was more life gain centric, a Leech Fanatic would be better. But it's been low end filler from what I've seen so far. Yeah,
I think that this is probably a decent part of like the Silver Quill aggro deck, but and the fact that it gains life can help in Witherbloom, but. At this point, I'm on Basic Conjuring. I think that's the best card, right?
Archway Commons is next. That's the land that ETBs tapped, and you have to pay a mana or sack it when it ETBs, but it taps for any color. I've been playing these, I think, more than most people have because I have been 3 colors so much, and I've been totally fine with it. I know some people don't like this card very much because it can be so slow, but I have not found myself under those pressure situations where I'm like, there's no way I can play an Archway Commons without dying here. I just always feel like I have time to do it. But if you're only 2 color, then I don't play it. So that's kind of the line.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's a necessary evil in some decks, but for the most part, I would try to avoid it.
I'm enthusiastic about it. Tangle Trap is the 1 in a green instant. Yeah. Does 5 damage to a flyer or destroys an artifact. Have not even seen this on the stack yet. So there you go.
Well, I mean,
the problem is you can just search this stuff up, right? Like,
yeah. Well, also I think the problem is there's not that many great targets for it, and you're just playing best of 1 mostly anyway. Even when you do play best of 3, it's just not that often that this would come up.
Lorehold Pledge Mage is the 1 red or 1 white or 1 red 2/2 with first strike and has Magecraft. It gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's tough to block. It just doesn't seem to have enough friends. This to me would be the linchpin of what the Lorehold aggressive deck would look like, but it doesn't end up being that because it just doesn't have enough friends. I mean, it's a fine card. I people play it and I'm like, it's good, but it just, you kind of hope that you'd see this with like a really aggressive 2-drop and then followed up by something powerful, and it just kind of seems on its own too often.
Yeah, I think it's good, but I think basic Conjuration is still better.
Same. Star Pupil, white for a 0/0, comes in with a 1/1 counter. And when it dies, you can put that counter onto something else.
Yeah, this is again part of the like Silver Quill aggro strategy. Definitely not something I want in most of my Lorehold decks, so certainly not a high priority. And I'm not even that convinced it's great, though I could definitely see games where it can be good.
Yeah, when I've had people play against turn 1, I'm like, okay, that's a thing. Excavated Wall is the 1 mana 0/4 with Defender that has 1 tap and mill a card. Have not seen
Just
this
quite
do
bad.
a thing, anything. Yeah. Serpentine Curve is the 3 and a blue sorcery, and you get a 0/0 blue fractal with X counters on it, where X is the total number of instants and sorcery cards you own in exile and your graveyard. I have seen one of the people I played against in the pre-release sealed made a 9/9. I was impressed.
I actually like this card. Maybe I should have actually pulled this card out to talk about earlier. I found this card to be pretty good in Prismari. It's okay in Quandrix. You can definitely end up in decks with it. I haven't found Quandrix to actually do the thing where I care about how many fractals I have. I know Biomathematician pushes you that direction, but that's been kind of medium. What I have found is that you can use this in your Prismari decks as just ways to play. It's like a 4 mana 5/5 or 7/7 a lot of the time. Yeah. And this is actually one of the best combos with Teach, by example, by the way. On turn 6, you just cast Teach, cast this, and make 2 7/7s.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty sweet. And it's already in the yard. Yeah, that's really cool. Now our uncommons, Twitch is first. It's black 1/1 flyer, and when it dies, you learn. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this card's good.
It's good.
I like it. I like it in the aggro Witherbloom or Silver Quill decks, but also the controlling ones. It's just a good card. Like it's a little better in the aggro decks because you care about the damage that it pecks in at, but it's still just a great card either way.
Creature Eye Bat. Next is Hall Monitor. This is the red 1/1 with haste. And you can pay 1 and a red and tap it to make a creature not block this turn. I like the card as a card. I think that that's a powerful effect. You know, in an aggressive deck, it's somewhat comparable to a tapper, but it doesn't really have a home. I mean, I'm assuming it's supposed to be in Lorehold off of a curve out or whatever, but again, there just seems to be a few too many cards in Lorehold that kind of take you off of that plan. So I'm not as excited. I still would take basic Conjuration here.
Yeah, me too.
Fortifying Draft is next. It's green for an instant. You gain 2 life. Target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. I feel like R&D had higher hopes for the life gain angle on Witherbloom than it actually plays out that way. And I've never even seen anybody put Fortifying Draft on the stack, even though it's fine at just +2/+2, but just not where you want to be.
A neat combo with it is the Reflective Golem. So you have the Golem out and you attack with some creatures and you go Fortifying Draft on the Golem, copy it. The first one resolves, gain 2/2/2. The second one resolves, gain 4/4/4.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's some action.
I like that. And then our rare is Blade Historian. So let's put this to the test. So this is 4 either red or white mana, and it's a 2/3 that says attacking creatures you control have double strike. See, now, if I start my draft off with that, which is a tough sell, by the way, because you're only going in the Lorehold with this effectively. Well, now I'm interested in all the Lorehold Pledge Mages and the Star Pupils and all that stuff, because now having access to a card like that is probably all it needs to push me over the top to draft the more aggressive version of the deck. I don't know that I'd want to first pick a card that effectively only goes into one college, though, when I have a perfectly fine, basic Conjuration, even Spectacle Mage I like. I think I would take those over Blade Historian.
I would take Blade Historian. I have lost badly enough to the card that I think it's just so powerful that I wouldn't pass it up. Also, at this point in the format, I'm definitely taking Blade Historian to just try to learn more about the decks that can go in.
Yeah, I would do it for that reason, but I feel like the chance that I don't play Lorehold is too high. Like if you get cut off a Lorehold, then it's just going right in the bin, where if I play basic Conjuration or Spectacle Mage, like I think I'm good to go. I think out of this pack, I would take Conjuration. Unless it was for science, but yeah.
I think that's a reasonable pick. I wouldn't be surprised if Blade Historian was better, even though you don't play it as often. But
Yeah.
I think either pick is a reasonable direction to go.
And then one last thing to touch on are the Mystical Archive cards. They're really interesting in the curveball that they throw at you. I was comparing it on the stream to like open deck lists that like you guys play at the MPL and Rivals level, where
right.
You'll see people put like a one of in their deck, and it's kind of like you always have to respect it. And now it's like, I mean, one just funny situation you can find yourself in is your opponent has one white mana up, and they can have like Swords to Plowshares or Mana Tithe, or there was one other that I can't remember. God's Willing. Yeah. And it's just like, do you play around everything all the time, or do you just let it go? For me, I'm just like, I'm not going to play around a Mystical Archive card until I see it. Basically, I mean, you know what I mean? Not, if there's an inflection point and I can't afford to, if it's a lot of pressure on me to actually make a play, I'll make the play. If I have all the time in the world, then sure, I'll play around it. But it has been interesting how some of, it's just like, oh, Day of Judgment. Well, crap, that's in the set, I guess, and all of a sudden you just get blown out by that. So, those have a big impact on the set, but I don't know that it's really predictable. And I don't think that I'm going to be actively playing around those cards that often because they just come up so infrequently.
I like where they've ended up because these are much, much, much more common than like invocations or anything, or masterpieces, right? So they put Soul Ring in the masterpieces and cards like Mind Twist in the invocations because these come up one per box. They're just not a big deal. At one per pack, they couldn't do that with the Mystical Archive cards. So all the cards, even though some of them are strong, are pretty reasonable. Like it wouldn't be shocking if you just had Day of Judgment in the set or, what have you. So I think they add a cool bit of flavor. I do think they're worth playing around if you can, but I would not like, I better not play another creature because of Day of Judgment. But I think that in general, these add a cool flavor to the set.
If you could have a similar set of cards for each set, would you?
Yeah, I think so.
It adds a cool dynamic. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, let's call it a show there, Luis. We'd love to hear your first impressions, as it were. You can find us on social media. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV, pretty much everywhere. Let us know what you think of the format. We've been getting tons of screenshots and feedback and stuff, but I always love to see that to get a vibe for what people are struggling with or what they really like. If you want to find anything related to the show, you can go to lrcast.com and you can find everything on the front page as far as links to kind of the community page on the subreddit, the Facebook page where I just post the episodes when they go up. If you happen to be, spend a lot of time on Facebook, you can get alerted there. Our streams, all of that kind of stuff's right on the front page of LRcast. Also want to thank our sponsor, Channel Fireball, once again. If you need to sell some cards back, Channel Fireball is a great place to go to do that. There's actually a couple of different ways that they buy cards. You can do U-Box We Buy, where if you have kind of like a unwieldy collection that you just want to get rid of, you can just throw it in a box and they'll sort it out for you and make you an offer. If you want to go card by card, you can do that as well, where you look up the price that they're paying on each of the cards and then, sell them that way so you can kind of be more selective about what you want to get rid of. All of that. And of course, don't forget box breaks. Also, if you want to get some new cards back, well, you can check out box breaks as well over at Channel Fireball, where you can buy like a part of a pack or a booster box and then get to watch it open live and see what you get on their stream there as well. That's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you next week.
So I don't know how much you follow football news, or soccer as we call it here, but the European Super League got announced, formed, and then I believe is falling apart at this very moment.
I saw that.
And for those who don't, it's basically the 12 richest teams in Europe. Kind of, we're gonna form our own league, and it's only gonna have the really popular teams. And there was no relegation, and like no one ever left the league, and it was exclusive. It was basically the MPL of soccer. Understandably, everyone got pretty mad. But the main factor that led to their downfall, of course, was that Randy Bueller and I sent them a letter explaining that we were the Vintage Super League and they were infringing.
I see.
It was funny looking at the reactions to this, because as someone who doesn't follow soccer or football, as it were, very, very closely, basically at all. Like I knew the names of the teams or whatever. When I first heard about it, I'm like, oh, this sounds kind of cool, because like who wouldn't want to see, like, instead of seeing like Real Madrid playing against Barcelona like once a year, you could see them play like multiple times a year, and every single week it's only the heavy hitters, right? Well, it turns out soccer, like most institutions, is not just built on competition. It's a combination of competition and history. And the problem here is that it was going to get rid of history. And it turns out it matters a lot to people that their teams were competing in these leagues, even if, some of the teams are never going to win. And they have been, kind of second tier teams their entire existence, or third, because, there are differences. At the end of the day, some of these teams are richer and more successful, and will continue to kind of widen the lead because they have more money. They can hire, the Messis and the Ronaldos and what have you. But it doesn't mean that you want your team to have a chance, because every now and then, one of these teams does just have a good run and make it to the top 4 of the championship or whatever. And and their supporters kind of wear that with pride, like much pride, actually, in a lot of ways, too much pride.
Of pride, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, like, you think Magic fans are unreasonable? Have you met, football hooligans?
They will just punch you. Like, it's just a total.
They will tear down your stadium.
Yes,
and so I read a lot of the reactions, and it was really something. And at this point, of course, all the politicians in Europe obviously saw the writing on the wall. You don't get to be, a politician if you're successful, and if you're not smart. And they realized they could just score easy points by just coming out like, oh yeah, no, I'll do everything in my power, Boris Johnson says, to stop the European Super League. And it's just like, he gets to just say that and rake it in, because everyone hates it, and he gets to be on the right side of it. So, long story short, the Vintage Super League is the way to go. The European Super League, apparently not.